Hello, my username is lazyperfectionist1. I've made this video in response to Agnostic Man 77's video, Portrait of an Atheist. There's what the word atheist actually means, and what it usually entails. Asymmetry is the absence of symmetry. Asexuality is the absence of sexuality. The prefix a means absence. Atheism is the absence of theism, of God belief. Atheism does not necessarily mean the personal ethic of relying on empiricism and rationalism to determine what is real, but the two usually go hand in hand. This is what's usually entailed. There are theists who know more about science, logic, and reason than I do, and there are atheists who are dumb as a brick. I recognize that. Nonetheless, God belief is irrational. We must also consider the connotations the masses are usually trained to associate with it. It's not an aversion to accountability. It's not the belief that the universe came from nothing or from a cosmic coincidence. It's not necessarily belief in evolution, although most atheists do. When I say I'm an atheist, all I'm telling you for certain about myself is that whatever my beliefs are, they do not include any gods. Neither the one who is three who are one who is three affirmed by the Christians, nor any of the thousands denied by the Christians and the Muslims and the Jews and the Hindus and the Buddhists just as readily. Atheism is not a belief system. It is the result of a belief system. Somewhere on YouTube, I don't recall where exactly, is a video posted by a theist posing two questions to one of my cohorts. What evidence would allow him to believe in God, as in the Christian God, and where could this evidence be found? As my cohort was glad to explain, this approach itself is ass backwards. The rational individual asks two different questions. What evidence does life present before me? What conclusions can I draw from that evidence? In figuring out what's real, preconceptions, however intuitive, habitual, instinctive, or naturally they may seem, must play no part, or one slips into confirmation bias. But now to the hot-button issues Agman brings up. I stand mostly on the pro-choice side. I believe that whether to have an abortion should be up to the woman. I am aware that there are those who see abortion as simply a way to avoid an unwanted responsibility, but the fact is that the vast majority of women would never even consider it, unless in the most desperate of straits. Do I resent that minority? Of course. But being categorical in our policies just to punish those few, at the expense of the vast majority whose worries are legit, reduces the children who are born to instruments of punishment and bondage. Labeling these women, as I've heard them called, worshippers of the false god of convenience, completely mischaracterizes their position and turns a blind eye and a deaf ear to their problems. Now I say mostly, because I develop some serious reservations when the third trimester rolls around. This happens in week 20. It is in week 24 that the fetus is usually developed enough to have brain activity, and it is at this point that the child is really a person in my reckoning. I believe that 20 weeks is time enough for a woman to make up her mind. I believe in giving the woman in this situation a choice, provided she's going to make it. I also believe that adolescents, male and female alike, at the age at which they first become able to conceive, cannot reasonably be expected to be past the more impulsive stages in life, so the process of arranging an abortion should account for this, requiring one to be arranged 48 hours in advance. This will place the young woman in a position to allow her initial astonishment and perhaps panic at the discovery to subside, allowing her to consider this more calmly and rationally, giving thought to what the consequences will be either way. I also object to the other side calling themselves pro-life. Look at the unstated suggestion here, that our side is anti-life, that we hear that a woman is pregnant and immediately say, "Kill it!" Their viewpoint here is that a woman should not be free to make the choice under any circumstances, so the correct choice of words here is anti-choice. Lastly on this subject, taking a hard line against abortion does not stop it or mitigate its occurrence. It only drives it underground. If you want to prevent abortion from happening, you have to target the causes, which means that first you have to understand them, and laziness is not among them. This one's nice and short. A death penalty does not reduce the crime rate. I can conceive of circumstances under which I would approve of its use, but I believe we can all agree that if nothing else, there are times when a death sentence can be more merciful than a life sentence. But when used, every possible precaution must be taken to ensure that the death is not painful or prolonged. That's all I have to say on that. Homosexual contact is not how the species properly perpetuates. So what? Neither is bowling. Shall we impose restrictions on that as well, on the same grounds? It's not as if this particular species needs help perpetuating. Same thing as with abortion. Simply taking a hard line does not eliminate it or reduce it. It drives it underground and creates a black market for the mob to exploit, at least in the case of marijuana. Taking a hard line against alcohol had the same effect. So making alcohol legal with restrictions brought it above ground and deprived organized crime of a major source of revenue. We were able to figure this out by understanding the psychological, sociological, and economic nuances of this particular market. Now those who understand the same nuances of the marijuana black market are suggesting generally the same approach, and their consensus on this is fairly complete. With other countries I'm not so sure, but as far as I understand it, U.S. economic prosperity is dependent on the circulation of the dollar. The more it circulates, the more it's worth. Therefore, if you want to have a continuously strong economy, you have to concentrate the tax cuts in the demographics that do the most spending. When a country gets too deep into socialism, the corporations come under the control of the government. When a country gets too deep into capitalism, it's the other way around. As a result, in application, every country in the world is only capitalistic or socialistic relative to other countries. Every economy is capitalistic to an extent, and socialistic to an extent. Every country which has ever existed has subjected its economy to some measure and some form of government restriction, and that's how it ought to be. Simply because a thing is a government restriction is far from adequate grounds to oppose it. I have serious misgivings about blindly trusting any huge corporation. Wealth corrupts as readily as power does. So I support mechanisms of accountability and transparency which grow increasingly inveterate as the corporations it deals with grow. That is, the larger the corporation, the more sophisticated the mechanism of corporate accountability must be. A nation's real strength comes from its middle class. When you lose your middle class, you lose your democracy. So I support well thought out, planned, and administered government regulation of large corporations, especially those which operate in other countries, especially weapons companies. I have serious misgivings about trusting any corporation which profits from, and therefore has a vested interest in maintaining, violent conflict. Such companies, I cannot help but feel, must be required by law to operate under complete transparency, and I can't think of any honest reason they would object to that. One thing the last couple of years have shown us is that when a company is described as too big to fail, it doesn't mean so big that it cannot fail. It means so huge we can't afford to let it fail because it will drag us all down with it. Corporate restrictions must include limitations on how large a company can grow. I support heavy corporate restrictions quite heavily, but mechanisms to equalize the distribution of wealth, not so much. There are countless honest means to wealth, ways to achieve it without detrimenting the lives of others. Those who cannot be content with these means I have no respect or sympathy for. One reason economic prosperity is so hard to predict is that its main ingredient is impossible to predict: innovation. But one reason why some countries produce major innovations more frequently than others is their tendency to grant pecuniary reward to innovators without subjecting them to any social or societal expectation that these rewards be shared with others. If someday someone develops a technical marvel which wipes out identity theft, or invents an automobile which runs better than any other on the market without a single drop of any fossil fuel, or figures out cold fusion, I will say to this person, "Thank you very much for this incredible development. Enjoy your retirement. I hope your life henceforth is long and leisurely. May your every exertion forward of this day be optional. But could you perhaps be persuaded to contribute to a few technical scholarships to assist others of us who may want to develop innovations of our own, the like of which may very well benefit your life as well?" Minimum wage should keep pace with inflation. The work week should be 35 hours, and each person should receive 5 weeks of paid vacation per year. Employee productivity depends on employee morale, and employees tend to have much higher morale when treated as something other than lowly peons. Illness does not care what tax bracket someone falls into. They don't care if that individual loses his or her job or encounters sudden expenses in some other area. If some insurance executive has to leave his or her third pool unfinished so the rest of us can receive health care, I say so be it. So there we have it. As far as these hot-button issues, this concludes the portrait of this atheist.